When I found my husband's letter, it had already been 3 weeks since his funeral. The house was quiet in a way that didn't feel like silence. It felt like absence. His shoes were still by the door. His old mug sat on the kitchen counter, a faint coffee ring beneath it, just like always. I couldn't move them. I couldn't move anything. That morning, I was cleaning out the top drawer of his study. The one he used to say was just for bills. But underneath a pile of papers, I saw an envelope, yellowed on the edges with my name written in his handwriting, to my dearest Anna. My hands shook. For a moment, I thought it was just another card from years ago, maybe a birthday note. But when I turned it over, I saw the seal, unbroken. I sat down at his desk. The smell of his cologne still lingered on the chair's leather. The sunlight hit the envelope, making the ink glow slightly. I traced my name with my finger before I finally opened it. Inside were 3 pages, folded carefully, neat, the way he always did things, and the first line read, "If you're reading this, it means I couldn't say everything I wanted while I was still here." My throat tightened. I didn't realize I was crying until a tear dropped right on the paper. He had written about things I'd forgotten, the first night we met, the arguments we never really solved, the way he noticed when I stopped smiling at breakfast, and then one line that tore through me. "I know I wasn't the husband you deserved, but I hope you remember me kindly." I pressed the letter to my chest and sobbed until the sun went down. That night, I realized sometimes the words we never say become the loudest ones left behind. After reading that letter, I couldn't stop thinking about how our life began. Before the pain, before the silence, there was laughter. There was love. I met Michael when I was 22. I had just started my job at the town library. He used to come in every Friday pretending to look for new history books, though he'd already read them all. One day I finally asked, "Are you here for the books or for me?" He just smiled, that quiet, crooked smile that made me forget how to breathe, and said, "Maybe both." That was how it started. Simple, ordinary, but somehow, it felt like it was meant to be. We got married 2 years later. It wasn't a grand wedding, just close friends, family, and a borrowed backyard filled with fairy lights. I wore a simple dress. He wore his best smile. I remember thinking, this is the beginning of forever. For years, we lived in that small house on Oak Ridge Street. It wasn't much, but it was ours. We planted roses by the porch, painted the kitchen together, and fought over how to arrange the living room furniture. I used to tease him, saying he couldn't match colors if his life depended on it. He would laugh and say, "Maybe not, but I chose you, so I must have done something right." We weren't perfect. We had our share of struggles, bills, long work hours, and later his health. But there was love. It lived in the small things, how he made coffee for me every morning, how I ironed his shirts before work, how we always sat together during thunderstorms, watching the rain on the window. As the years passed, I noticed he began to change. The sparkle in his eyes faded slowly, replaced by a quiet heaviness I didn't understand. He'd sit on the porch for hours just staring at the street, like he was waiting for something. When I asked what was wrong, he'd say, "I'm fine. Anna, just tired." And I believed him. We never had children. It wasn't by choice. It just never happened. I used to tell myself we were enough for each other, and maybe we were. For a while. But sometimes I caught him looking at the neighbors' kids playing outside, his eyes soft and far away. One night I asked him, "Do you ever wish things were different?" He didn't answer right away. Then he said quietly, "Sometimes. But I wouldn't trade you for anything." As his health started to decline, I noticed more changes. The hospital visits, the pills on the kitchen counter, the sleepless nights. I tried to stay strong and for both of us. But sometimes I'd go into the bathroom, close the door, and cry silently so he wouldn't hear me. He would notice, of course. He always did. "You're tired," he'd say. "You should rest." And I'd answer, "I'm fine." We both lied to protect each other. Despite everything, there were still moments of sweetness. Like when he'd surprise me with breakfast in bed, burnt toast and all, or when he'd hum old songs while fixing the fence. He wasn't a man of many words, but when he said, "I love you," it was always steady, always sure. Then came that winter, the one that changed everything. He'd been coughing for weeks, but he refused to go to the doctor. "It's just the cold," he said. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. One night, he woke me up, gasping for breath. His skin was pale. His hands shook. I rushed him to the hospital, praying the whole way there. The doctor said his heart was weak, too weak. I remember their words, the way they avoided eye contact when they spoke. I held his hand as they wheeled him away, not knowing that would be the last time I'd see him alive. He passed away peacefully, they told me. But peace is a word that doesn't mean much when someone you love is gone. The days that followed were a blur. Friends came by. Food piled up in the kitchen. People told me to stay strong, but no one tells you how to fill the silence that follows a goodbye. I went through his things slowly, touching each one like it might bring him back. His watch, his glasses, the scarf he wore every winter, and that's when I found the letter. Hidden deep in the drawer, waiting for me to find it. That's when everything began to make sense. His quietness, his distant smiles, the way he'd look at me when he thought I wasn't watching. He had known. Maybe for months. Maybe longer. He had written that letter because he didn't want me to carry the weight of his goodbye without hearing his heart one last time. After finding that letter, I started remembering all the moments I had ignored, the small signs that something inside Michael was breaking long before his body gave up. It's strange how you can live beside someone for years and still miss what's right in front of you. Back then, I thought he was just tired. Or maybe bored. But looking back, I think he was slowly saying goodbye in his own quiet way. It began with silence. Michael had always been a calm man, never loud, never angry. But after he retired, that silence grew heavier. At first, I filled it with noise. The TV, the radio, the sound of dishes clinking in the kitchen. But nothing seemed to reach him anymore. Sometimes I'd find him sitting on the porch, just staring at the horizon. I'd bring him coffee, try to start a conversation. Remember the time we got lost on our anniversary trip? I'd say, smiling. He'd look at me, nod gently, and say, "I remember," before going quiet again. At first, I blamed myself. Maybe I was talking too much or not saying the right things. Maybe he just needed space. But that space began to grow between us like an invisible wall, one we didn't know how to climb over anymore. One evening, we had dinner in complete silence. The only sound was the clinking of forks against plates. I tried to ask about his day, but he just said, "Same as yesterday." That night, when I went to bed, I lay awake listening to his breathing beside me. Even that sounded tired. Then came the day I found a small notebook in his drawer. He had always been private, so I shouldn't have looked, but something in me wanted to understand him. Inside, I found short notes, not long entries, just sentences scattered across pages. I feel like a guest in my own home. She doesn't notice when I'm gone for hours. How do you tell the person you love that you're fading? I remember closing that notebook, my heart racing. I wanted to confront him, but I didn't. Instead, I put it back and pretended I never saw it. I spent that whole evening replaying every conversation we'd had. Had I become distant too? Maybe I had stopped asking how he really felt. Maybe I was so focused on keeping things normal that I missed the moments he needed me the most. Later that night, as he sat watching TV, I sat beside him and slipped my hand into his. He smiled faintly, like he wanted to say something, but instead, he just squeezed my hand gently. A few weeks later, his health began to decline faster. The doctor said his heart wasn't getting better, and stress could make it worse. I tried to act strong, to keep things light and cheerful, but inside, I was terrified. He started sleeping in the armchair by the window because he said it was easier to breathe upright. I'd wake up in the middle of the night to check on him, drape a blanket over his shoulders and whisper, "Come to bed." He'd always answer, "In a bit," but he rarely did. One morning, I found him in the kitchen holding one of our old photo albums. He was staring at a picture from our first Christmas together, him wearing a ridiculous red sweater, me laughing beside him. "Those were good times," he said quietly. "They still are," I replied. But he didn't answer. It hurt to watch him drift away, not just physically but emotionally. I kept hoping he'd open up, but he stayed behind that wall of silence. I started to wonder if he blamed me for something I didn't even know I'd done. One afternoon, I heard him talking softly in the study. I thought he was on the phone, but when I walked closer, he was just sitting there whispering to himself. I only caught a few words. "I'm sorry, Anna. I should have told you sooner." I froze. My heart sank. What was he sorry for? When I asked later, he said, Oh, just talking to myself. I wanted to believe him, but a part of me knew there was more. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept returning to that notebook, those words, that apology. A week later, we argued, the kind of quiet argument that hurts more than shouting ever could. It started because he forgot to take his medicine. I found the pills untouched, and I got angry, not because of the pills, but because I was scared. Why won't you take care of yourself, Michael? Do you want to leave me? I said. He looked at me with sad eyes and whispered, maybe that's what you want. That sentence broke something inside me. I didn't answer. I just walked away, holding back tears. For days, we barely spoke. He'd sit on the porch, I'd stay inside. We lived in the same house, but felt miles apart. Then, one evening, he came to me while I was folding laundry. He looked fragile, his skin pale, his hands shaking slightly. I'm sorry, he said softly. I didn't mean that. I wanted to say it's okay, but the words got stuck in my throat. I just nodded, pretending everything was fine. I didn't know it then, but that was the last real conversation we'd ever have. A few days later, he collapsed while watering the plants outside. The neighbor found him and called me in panic. When I reached him, he was lying on the grass, his lips trying to form my name. I held his face in my hands, crying, "Stay with me, Michael, please." He smiled faintly, and then closed his eyes. The ambulance came too late. That moment, that breath between life and death, it still echoes inside me. I never got to tell him how sorry I was, or how much I still loved him even when I didn't understand him. When I found the letter later, it was as if he had left me the words I couldn't say, a final piece of his heart to fill the silence he left behind. Every sentence in that letter felt like a whisper from him, explaining what I never knew. It was a Sunday morning, the kind of morning that usually started with his humming in the kitchen, but this time, there was only silence. I sat by the window, watching dust particles float in a beam of light. Everything looked still, too still. My daughter had gone back to her own life. My son called sometimes, but his words always felt rushed. I turned my wedding ring on my finger, remembering the way he used to smile when he saw it. It had been 4 months since he was gone. 4 months since the house had lost its warmth. 4 months since I had stopped opening the drawers in his study. But that morning, something felt different. Something in me whispered, "Go inside." His study door creaked when I opened it, just like always. The air smelled faintly of his cologne and old paper. On the desk sat his reading glasses, a cup still stained with the shadow of his last tea, and a stack of unopened envelopes. I walked in slowly, my heart beating in my throat. For the first time, I looked through the drawers, old bills, his notebook, and then a sealed white envelope tucked beneath a photo of us from our younger days. The envelope had my name written in his handwriting. To my wife, Mary. My breath caught. I sat down in his chair, my hands trembling as I held it. I tore it open gently, afraid that the paper might fall apart in my hands. His handwriting looked slower, shakier than before. If you're reading this, my love, I know I'm no longer there beside you. And if that's true, please don't cry. I've wanted to tell you this for a long time. I pressed the letter against my chest, trying to steady myself. I could almost hear his voice reading it aloud. I was never good at saying things. I hurt you more times than I can count, not with anger, but with silence. You deserved words, and I gave you quiet. You deserved comfort, and I gave you distance. I saw it, Mary, I just didn't know how to bridge it. My tears blurred the ink. Every line felt like a wound reopening, gentle but sharp. Then came the words that made my heart stop. There's something you never knew. The week before my last hospital visit, I went through my old drawer and found a small envelope, the one you gave me on our 25th anniversary. I had never opened it, Mary, not because I didn't care, but because I was afraid. I froze. He never opened my anniversary letter? The one I'd written the night we almost separated? I remembered that day clearly, how I wrote that letter out of pain, not knowing if our marriage would survive. I told him how lonely I felt, how invisible I'd become in my own home. And yet, I'd ended it with love. With a promise, he never told me he read it. When I finally read your letter, I cried. I realized you had been right all along. I had stopped seeing you, stopped hearing you. I thought providing was enough, but I forgot that love also needs words. I wanted to tell you that night, but fear kept me quiet. I thought there would be time. I was wrong. I covered my mouth, trying not to sob out loud. The house was silent, but my heart screamed inside. For years, I had carried guilt, thinking maybe I didn't do enough. And now I knew he carried the same guilt, too. Two people under the same roof, both waiting for the other to speak, until life ran out of time. If there's one thing I could change, Mary, it would be to hold your hand more, to laugh with you again, and to say thank you for never giving up on me. Please live the rest of your days without my shadow following you. Smile again. Wear the red scarf you love. Plant the tulips. Love life, the way you used to before me. I clutched the paper to my heart. My tears finally came, not of sadness alone, but of release. In that moment, I didn't feel alone anymore. It was as if he was right there beside me, whispering those words himself. I stayed in that room for hours, rereading his words, whispering small replies like he could still hear me. I forgive you, I said softly. And thank you for seeing me, even if it came late. The letter had turned my sorrow into peace. For years, I thought the story of us ended the day he left. But now I realized love doesn't end with goodbye. It lingers in words, in memories, in letters waiting to be opened. The next morning, the world felt softer. The air seemed clearer. The light through the curtains had a different warmth to it. Or maybe I had changed. For the first time in months, I made breakfast just for myself. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I brewed tea the way he liked it, strong, with a hint of honey, and placed a cup on the table beside mine. I didn't cry this time. I smiled. His letter had given me something I didn't know I still needed: permission to live again. Outside, the garden was overgrown. The tulips we planted together years ago had withered. I knelt down, brushed away the dry leaves, and whispered, "He told me to plant them again." I pressed new bulbs into the soil one by one. Each one felt like a small prayer, for the years we lost, for the love we found too late, and for the peace I now felt. As I worked, the breeze lifted my hair, carrying a faint scent of earth and spring. I looked up at the sky and said softly, "You'd laugh at how long it took me to do this." For the first time in so long, I laughed too. That afternoon, my daughter arrived. She looked tired. City life had aged her faster than I expected. She hugged me, and for the first time in months, I didn't break down in her arms. Over tea, I told her I found her father's letter. She froze for a moment, her eyes wide, unsure whether she wanted to hear more. Then I smiled and said, "He apologized, sweetheart, for everything. He loved us. He just didn't know how to show it." She reached across the table and took my hand. We sat there in silence, tears quietly tracing down both our cheeks, not of grief, but of understanding. Later that evening, I went back to his study. It no longer felt heavy. The silence there wasn't lonely anymore. It was comforting, like being surrounded by his memory. I cleaned the desk, polished the photo frame, and placed the letter inside it, behind our old picture. Now, when I looked at that photo, I'd remember not just our smiles, but everything we endured and everything we learned too late. Before leaving, I whispered, "You're home now, and so am I." A few weeks later, my son and grandchildren came to visit. The house, once silent, filled again with laughter, footsteps, and the smell of food. I cooked his favorite dish, chicken stew with rosemary, and when the children asked about Grandpa, I smiled and told them stories. I didn't hide the pain anymore. I turned it into lessons about love, patience, and the words we must never leave unsaid. They listened quietly, even the little ones, as if they could feel his presence too. After dinner, I stood by the window, watching them play in the yard. For a moment, I felt him beside me, his hand resting lightly on my shoulder. The next morning, I opened my closet and took out the red scarf he mentioned in the letter. It had been years since I wore it. The fabric still carried his faint scent, old cologne and time. I wrapped it around my shoulders and looked in the mirror. For a long moment, I didn't see a widow. I saw a woman who had loved deeply, lost deeply, and lived to tell her story. When I stepped outside, the wind caught the ends of the scarf, lifting it gently like a flag of freedom. There's a bench near the small lake where we used to sit together every Sunday evening. I went there again that day, carrying a small bouquet of tulips, the ones that had finally bloomed. I placed them beside me and whispered, "They're for you." The water shimmered under the sun, and the wind rippled across its surface like a quiet reply. I didn't speak much after that. I just sat there, letting the peace of it all sink in. The love that had outlived time, the letter that had healed years of silence. I've read his letter many times since that day. Each time it feels a little different, less like goodbye, more like guidance. Grief doesn't vanish, I've learned. It softens. It becomes part of who you are. And love, the real kind, doesn't fade when the person is gone. It changes form. It becomes the air you breathe, the light you walk in, the strength that carries you forward. I once thought I lost him forever. Now I know he never really left. If you ever loved someone and never said what you needed to, don't wait. Say it now. Because sometimes the words we hold back become the letters we never get to send. I folded his letter one last time and whispered, "Thank you for teaching me that." Then I looked out the window at the setting sun, its golden light spilling across the room, warm, endless, and alive. The sun was setting when I closed the curtains that evening. The house was quiet, but it didn't feel empty anymore. Every corner seemed to hold a memory. The sound of his laugh, the rustle of his newspaper, the way he used to call my name softly from the hallway. I sat in my chair by the window, holding a cup of tea. The same chair I once sat in when the pain was still raw. Now the silence felt like an old friend. I had learned to live with it. People say time heals all wounds. I don't think that's true. Time doesn't erase the ache. It teaches you how to carry it gently. It shows you how to remember without falling apart. I used to think grief was about holding on, but I've learned it's also about letting go of anger, regret, and the words left unsaid. Now when I think of him, I don't see the hospital bed. I see the way his eyes lit up when he saw me in that red scarf. I hear him laughing as the wind tangled my hair during our walks by the lake. That's how I choose to remember him, not as someone who left, but as someone who loved me in his quiet way. This morning, I walked into the garden and saw the first tulip bloom. It stood tall and bright, facing the sun, the same way he used to stand by the window with his coffee. I smiled and whispered, "You'd be proud." They finally bloomed. It's funny how life works. The things we thought were lost forever find their way back. Sometimes through letters, sometimes through flowers, sometimes through quiet mornings when our hearts are finally ready. That night, I sat at his old desk and took out a sheet of paper. For years, he was the one who left a letter for me. Now it was my turn. I wrote, "My dear, if there's a place where you can read this, I want you to know I'm living again. I laugh with our children, I plant our flowers, and I wear the scarf you loved. You gave me one last gift, peace." I folded the letter neatly and placed it beside his photo. It wasn't for anyone else to find. It was just my way of saying I'm okay now. As I look back, I realize love isn't about perfection. It's about persistence. About staying even when words fail. It's about learning to forgive, not just the people who hurt us, but ourselves too. If you're listening to my story, maybe you're holding on to something unsaid, a letter unwritten, an apology delayed, a love unspoken. Don't wait. Say it now. Because sometimes the most beautiful words are the ones we still have time to share. And if it's too late, remember, even the words left behind can still heal when they come from the heart. The night grew quiet. I turned off the lamp, leaving just the faint glow of the moon. As I lay in bed, I whispered one last time, "Good night, my love." The wind brushed gently against the window, almost like a reply. And for the first time in a long while, I slept peacefully.